All good. All right. We can start. There's not that many news I have to share because I've been busy. I don't know if you're aware, but in this area, we had PS Configure Minicon, which is in September. We'll probably do again next September. And in this map, we had the user groups tonight. So we had 1, 2, 3, 4 sessions, 3 user groups: the Swiss, the London, and the French PowerShell user groups. So we had a session in German, one in French, and one in English. And we had a Jim Brewer from the PowerShell team coming and doing a presentation, a deep dive in Crescendo. Hopefully the recording worked, so I will share them soon, probably next week. So today we have a session from Yorick, who's there, and hopefully it will be recorded as well. So Yorick, there's also Jody and Julia who wanted to talk, but I can't see them. Let me see if they're around. Otherwise, we'll have to stop them. Let's give a couple of minutes, and then Johan, if you have some updates on the releases, you can give the quick updates on the releases, and then I'll just move away.
We have not so many updates. Certified DSC, the one notable that has a breaking change for SATREC, and Computer Management DSC that we merged the first class-based resource. So there's a breaking change that it requires VMF 5.0 from now on. I should also, what I saw here just an hour ago, that the latest sampler that we released did have a bug with the composite resources. So if a resource using a composite resource and build on Ubuntu in Azure Pipelines, it will fail. So you have to switch over to a Windows build worker, then it works again. So good thing to know about. That's it, Gail, I think. Gail is here. So Yorick, you can take the stage.
Perfect. If I'm not mistaken, you should be able to see my screen. Yeah, perfect. Well, hello everybody. My name is Yorick Kuijs. I'm a cloud solution architect working for Microsoft in the Netherlands. And some of you already know me. I have been working with the DSC community for several years already. I'm the owner of the SharePoint DSC module. Back in 2015, I started working on that together with Brian Farnell. He started the module and I started contributing. And in 2017, I took over the ownership and have been doing SharePoint DSC since then. And about 4 years ago, in 2018, I also started working on Microsoft 365 DSC. Nick Charlebois, one of the other founders of this module, came with the idea: can we use the DSC concept to manage Microsoft 365? Can we somehow use that DSC, DSC technology to manage cloud technologies? And we started working on that. Well, Microsoft 365 DSC is the result where we are at the moment. So as mentioned, we started back in 2018 as Office 365 DSC. With the change in vision of Microsoft from Office 365 to Microsoft 365, we also renamed to Microsoft 365 DSC to align with that vision. And where Office 365 supported Skype, Exchange, and SharePoint, with Microsoft 365, a lot of more workloads have been introduced: Teams, Intune, security, compliance, the whole shebang. And in principle, it's just like any other module. like SharePoint DSC or Computer Management DSC or SQL Server DSC, it really doesn't matter. It's a DSC module. However, the odd thing with Microsoft 365 DSC, and it is rarely used in conjunction with other DSC modules. And why that is, I'll get back to in a moment. And just like all other modules, unit tests are required to for new resources. But we are not yet. It's on my to-do list, but I haven't managed to implement it yet. We don't use the DSC community framework at this time. So we are requiring unit tests and the unit test of each resource, and it should not fail, and it should have code coverage of a certain percentage, just like you're used to in other DSC modules, but not to the same level as the DSC community framework. Then where does Microsoft 365 DSC differ from other models? And that's basically where DSC is targeting. If you look at the classic DSC modules, they run on the local machine. They target the local machine. So when the LCM receives a configuration, it configures the local machine. So it configures the registry, it configures computer settings, etc. Microsoft 365 is a software as a service platform. And the software as a service platform does not have an LCM by itself. There's no LCM in the cloud. And it's also, there's no virtual machine somewhere within Microsoft 365 where you can say, okay, please go ahead and manage Microsoft 365 for me. So that's something we have to approach a little bit different. And that is also why you barely see other DSC modules being used in conjunction. And they all target local settings, registry, etc. And Microsoft 365, we're using an LCM of somewhere, a custom LCM somewhere, and then target the Microsoft 365 tenant. What possibilities do we have? First of all, we can use a virtual machine. Just create a virtual machine. It can be a virtual machine on-prem. It can be a virtual machine on your own laptop with Hyper-V. It can be a virtual machine in Azure. It can be a virtual machine in any other cloud. It really doesn't matter. It just needs to be a Windows virtual machine that has a local configuration manager. And you can use that local configuration manager to target a Microsoft 365 tenant. But there's also a downside there. Usually, if you want to use the apply and monitor functionality, you send a tenant or you send the configuration to the LCM, and that starts checking the compliance if it's still in the desired state. But usually a configuration is a configuration of a single tenant. You don't want a single MOV file containing settings of multiple tenants. So each tenant has its own MOV file, which also means you need a virtual machine per tenant. And that's where, it becomes a little bit different. If you have a small environment with maybe a test environment and a production environment, that's no problem. You need two virtual machines. But I've spoken with an ISV who said, yeah, this is nice, but I'm managing 150 customers, each having a test and a production tenant. So basically you're telling me I need 300 VMs just to manage each tenant, each one of those tenants. So there's a challenge there. Then we can have an Azure function or container. This is something we're working on how you can best use this. Some containers inside of Azure don't have an LCM yet. I heard that they are working on it, but right now it's not in there. An Azure function basically means you need to create your own logic and use PowerShell to check, basically create your own LCM inside of Azure functions. That's also possible. Create your own LCM, create your own local configuration manager that does the testing for you using the invoke DSC resource. You can create something, but it requires you to build something yourself. But what I've lately built for a customer is use Azure DevOps pipelines, where you use the LCM on a machine to apply only, and then use a scheduled pipeline to basically mimic the monitoring functionality. And this is a solution that I currently like the most. And I recently wrote a white paper, a Microsoft 365 DSC white paper, in which I describe step by step how to implement this solution. If you're interested, I'll share a link later. Besides the LCM issue, the LCM challenge we have, Microsoft 365 also offers some unique features. As you can see here, the automate and the monitor part, applying the configuration and monitoring if you're still in the desired state, that's native DSC functionality. But we've built additional functionalities on top of that. First of all, you might have heard of reverse DSC that is built by Nick Charlebois. I see that he's also in the room. And that basically allows you to export the current state into a desired state. So you can export the current situation into a PowerShell desired state configuration file. And if you have an export, you can also apply that to a different tenant, and that way sync settings between two settings. For example, you have something on a production environment, and you want to sync those settings to a test tenant to test something. Export your production settings and import to your test environment, and then you can do a test with the exact same settings as you have on your production environment. But this requires an orchestration script. Each technology is a little bit different. So in order to export your current situation, it needs an orchestration script. And there are a couple of orchestration scripts available for reverse DSC. There used to be a SharePoint DSC one, but I'll come back to that later, integrated into the module itself. I think it's X Web Administration, and there's another module where you have an orchestration script. But for Microsoft 365 DSC, this orchestration script is natively built into Microsoft 365 DSC. So you don't need any other scripts or other things. You can just install Microsoft 365 DSC, and the reverse DSC support is natively built in. So you can immediately export your current configuration. This is also the case with SharePoint DSC, but all other modules don't have this functionality. And we even provide an export command generator on export.microsoft365dsc.com. Let me quickly show you that. Here it is, where you can simply select, let's first say none, and then we can simply select the resources you want to have exported. Here in the top, you can specify what kind of authentication mechanism do you want to use. Let's say credentials in this case. Click generate. And here you have the export commandlet you have to use to export these specific resources to a DSC file. So it's a very simple process. Just click generate, or select and click generate, and then you can simply generate the export command.
Can you increase the font a little bit? The font size is too small.
Oh, sorry.
And then while I'm here, I just wanted to say hi. And then Jody is there, and Julia is somewhere around. I can't see her right now, but Jody just wanted to say hi before she's got to leave.
Oh yeah. Hey everybody. Nice to see everybody. Also, just wanted to introduce my colleague Julia Wong, who's on the call, who's going to be working on machine config as well. Only update today is that we're just going to post a survey in the chat that if you just want to fill it out at your leisure, that would be amazing. Main goal of the survey is to get a better understanding of some of the much loved features on AADSC. as we work to hopefully try to incorporate some of those into future plans for machine config. Sorry to interrupt, and thanks so much for the chat, Yorick, and thanks, Gail. I'm out.
Thanks, Yorick. The size perfect.
Okay, excellent. So it's just a matter of selecting the resources you want to export, click generate, copy this command to your clipboard, and then paste on your local machine, enter your credentials, and then those resources are exported. Another thing, if you have exported the configuration, you can do much more with that. Microsoft 365 DSC also allows you to generate documentation of a created export. As IT persons, the average IT person loves to have good documentation, especially good and up-to-date documentation. However, they also usually hate creating documentation. It looks like it's some kind of mandatory skill of every IT person. But creating documentation is not one of our best features. What if we just can generate the documentation of an existing tenant? With Microsoft 365 DSC, you can first create an export and then generate documentation from that export. We can generate documentation in Excel format, in HTML format, or JSON format, and then you can use that JSON format to import it into any other process you have within your organization. Another possibility you have is comparing two generated exports. Now, if you have a test and a production environment, generate both exports, exports from both environments, and then compare where they are different. Or an export over time. Export this month, export next month, and see what has changed over time. This feature is using the DSC parser module to convert a DSC configuration, a text configuration, into an object. And one thing to note here, it requires a static configuration. So it currently does not support regular PowerShell keywords like if, for each, etc. So it's not a parser of the actual DSC configuration. It's a static compare tool between two exported. The export generates a static configuration. So it compares those two. We also implemented improved logging. What I noticed with other DSC modules is that we have verbose logging, but if it's running in the background, most users have difficulties finding those log files. In the C Windows System 32 configuration status folder, there is always the verbose logging available, but some modules also do not provide enough information about what exactly is differing. Why is a resource not in the desired state? They just output true or false, and not why it is true or false. Or if you run into an error, the verbose output does not show the exact error message. That's why we improved we improved the logging functionalities. We added lots of progress logging, so you can simply say, okay, step 1, step 2, it's a line that in the code, line X, line Y. And each test method always outputs the current and the target values, the desired state values. So if you do a test DSC configuration, you can see these are the current values, these are the target values, and you can compare them easily why they are different. But not just that. Microsoft 365 DSC also has its own event log, to which we log errors and where drifts are logged. So if we take a look at an example there, as you can see here, I'll increase the font. There's a warning, and in that event, it says there's a configuration drift. In this case, in the Intune device configuration policy Windows 10, that's the resource. The parameters that are not in the desired state is this parameter. The current value is this. The target value, the desired value is that. And the entire list of desired values is mentioned underneath here. So you can simply monitor your event log. Hey, there is a drift, and this exact value is where it is differencing. If an error occurs, we have an error in the event log, and you can see where that exact value has been generated, on which line in which module. So there's a lot of information when something goes wrong and why a specific resource is not in the desired state. And this makes, let me move that, it makes troubleshooting a lot easier. Another thing that we have built in is telemetry. Microsoft 365 shares telemetry data, and it allows us to see what features are used most, what versions are used, etc. So all kinds of information. But of course, we are not sharing any sensitive or personal identifiable information. No settings, no URLs, internal URLs, etc. So everything inside of the resource is not shared. It's just if a resource is not in the desired state, or if a resource, if it's monitoring, if it's exporting. So the features, we are sharing that. No sensitive information. And if you really don't want to share telemetry, it's also always a possibility to disable the telemetry by using the set M365DSC telemetry option commandlet. You can enable it, or you can even configure your own telemetry log analytics workspace where your the telemetry is uploaded, so you can do your own telemetry. And one big functionality we're currently also working on is a dynamic resource generator. Microsoft 365 constantly evolves, and it's a real challenge to keep up. We have many product groups working on new functionality of Microsoft 365, and the Microsoft 365 DSC team is pretty small. So we wanted a way to quickly generate, if new functionality is created, to quickly generate a resource for that functionality. And that's where we came up with the dynamic resource generator. Right now, Microsoft 365 DSC is using many dedicated PowerShell modules like the Teams module or the Exchange module or PnP PowerShell. But the end goal is to move everything to the Microsoft Graph. So we have a single authentication module, and currently some workloads are already using the Graph, like Azure AD and Intune. If everything is moved to the Graph, within the Graph, there's a lot of information, what permissions are needed for a specific commandlet, or what kind of information is returned from a commandlet, etc. That is all retrievable from the Graph. So if we have that information, we can use that to dynamically generate resources. So where we currently have red and a little bit bigger, have modules for the different workloads. The end goal is to have everything on Graph modules. We're not there yet, and we're relying on the various product groups to make Graph modules available. But once we're there, it makes life so much easier. But right now, the dynamic resource generator is able to generate resources that are based on the Graph API. And as mentioned, currently we're generating a lot of Intune resources that are already using the Graph, a lot of Azure AD resources that are using the Graph. So it enables us to quickly generate resources and unit tests, and the only thing you need to do is to validate the generated code to test the resource if it works properly, and if it does, you have a new resource. Instead of building everything from scratch, we generate everything. And if we're going to take a look at the vision and the roadmap, what are we planning for Microsoft 365 DSC? Our bold vision, you have to be bold, is that we want to become, for Microsoft 365, what ARM templates are to Azure. So ARM templates is the one of the de facto standards, and now with Bicep it's a little bit different story, but we want to be the standard to implement configuration as code within Microsoft 365. And the roadmap we have planned is basically first to support all workloads and all features. But as mentioned before, we're a relatively small team. And right now we're working based on demand. If we get a request of certain functionality, we start working on that. So where the most demand comes in, that's where we focus our attention. But we're also relying on available PowerShell commandlets and APIs. For example, a lot of features in the classic admin portal for SharePoint, there are no PowerShell commandlets or APIs available for those settings. So we are relying on the SharePoint product group to make PowerShell commandlets or APIs available for them before we can implement those settings. And we want to migrate as much as possible to the graph. As soon as a graph module comes available for a certain workload, we'll immediately start working on switching those resources to the graph, just to make it easier to generate new resources with the dynamic resource generator. If you're interested in more information, I have a whole list of resources. We have a Microsoft 365 DSC website. You can contribute and ask questions, submit issues on our GitHub project page, just like the other DSC modules. In our case, it's under the Microsoft organization and not under the DSC community organization. You can download Microsoft 365 DSC from the PowerShell gallery. And if you're interested in using Microsoft 365 with Azure DevOps in a true DevOps style, implement deployment with Azure DevOps and pipelines, I've created this white paper you can find on aka.ms/M365DSC white paper. If you're interested in using DevOps with other modules, of course, you can use the guide there as well. It's a step-by-step guide on how to create your own pipeline infrastructure in Azure DevOps. If you all notifications, everything we communicate, we do it via Twitter, twitter.com/Microsoft365DSC, and we have a YouTube channel with some training videos, etc. So if you want to know more, there's available information available there. And then I'm all through what I wanted to share with you. Are there any questions? You're on mute, Johan. Or you're not talking to me.
If you have any question, go on the Q&A area where I am, so then everyone can hear it, and it will also be included in the recording. Thank you. And remove your mute as well.
G'day everyone, how you going?
Hey.
I threw a couple of questions. I threw a question in the chat, and I was just kind of interested in the reverse DSC. Like I've used the module before, so I kind of have a bit of it was a couple of years ago now. So I had a really good understanding, but I had an understanding of exactly what you guys were trying to achieve. And one of the questions I wanted to ask with regards to the reverse DSC side of things, if this is probably also more pointed at Gail as well, is that if you're trying to manage multiple 365 environments, and obviously you're trying to standardize across those environments, would it also be beneficial to have reverse DSC then essentially be then translated into datum YAML configuration that basically then be, essentially based on a hierarchical configuration model?
Good question. We haven't looked at the datum implementation at this time.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. The other thing which I was going to ask, I'm really interested in seeing this dynamic resource generator. Is that on your GitHub, that code?
Yeah, exactly. It's
Okay, cool.
it's inside of our repository. So you can have a look there. Yeah.
So out of curiosity, how does it function? Because ultimately, if you're trying to pull, obviously you're trying to generate a DSC resource based off an API request. Is that what's the end state?
Yeah, we are using. Nick just shared a link to documentation in our on our Microsoft365DSC.com website. But if you want to generate a new resource with the dynamic resource generator, you specify which commandlet you want to use, and it's pulling information from the graph and generating. We've got a template, and it's populating that template, retrieving what parameters are used, and then populating that into the resource. It's generating the schema. It's generating the PSM file. And then generating the unit tests as well, based on the information it is retrieving from the graph and the graph.
Okay, yep. So, okay. So you're looking at so by the graph commandlet, you mean the MG graph commandlet, or you mean the actual API endpoint?
No, we're using the graph commandlets.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, you just basically go through there, grabbing the parameters. Then you're looking for the URL within that to be able to then figure out. Actually, no, you'd just be looking at the parameter sets. That's really what's the parameter set information, and that's what you're using to pass in. Okay. Yep. Yeah,
and
cool.
The graph commandlets are also the internal graph team has a team that is generating PowerShell commandlets based on the graph API. So those graph commandlets are also generated. So if a new version of the graph API is released, they just generate a new set of commandlets based on the underlying API. So the commandlets are also generated, and there's a find mg graph command where you can retrieve all kinds of information about a specific commandlet. What kind of permissions does it need? What kind of parameters does it have, etc. The whole information we need is pulled from there.
Would it within that kind of dynamic resource generator, is there any sort of versioning capability? So essentially you're going, okay, there's a new version out. Obviously the existing version is known working. Obviously you don't particularly really want to go and say, okay, we're going to, generate a new resource and then push that immediately into production. Is there how would it handle versioning in that kind of instance?
I'm not sure on that. I'm not the one that's working a lot with the dynamic resource generator, so I not 100% sure on that area. If you contact me a little later, then I can find it out and share the information with you later.
No worries. I think I'm on my phone at the moment. I'm literally
okay.
I've literally just was sitting the whole on the train and just got into the office. So what I'll do is I'll reach out later.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, really awesome talk. Thank you. That was really great.
Yeah, no worries.
Can you hear me this time?
Yeah, yeah, I can.
Thank you. I just wanted to also comment on the reverse DSC stuff. I think converting the data that we are exporting into the datum YAML stuff is not really helpful because we are speaking of hierarchical data. So what we retrieve from the Azure tenant is flat data. So there is no idea how we can convert it into hierarchical data. But if we export the data, is it possible to export the data in a convertible format? So what I've realized is, or maybe I've done something wrong, if I export the data, I get one big script that contains data and the configuration. So config data and the configuration merge into one file. Do you have a feature to just export the configuration data and not the configuration itself?
Currently, we don't. It's a good idea, and it's something we can start thinking about and implement. But currently, we don't. It's the export generates the information, the PS1 file, and information that is tenant specific, like URLs, for example, are exported in a configuration data file. So we do have a configuration data file, but that's just for tenant specific information. So if you have a specific value, a specific parameter has value 5, that is hard coded in the PS1 file. But if you have, I'm creating a site collection with tenantname.sharepoint.com/sites/hr, that is made dynamic based on the tenant name, and the tenant name is stored inside of the configuration data file that is also created. Okay, good. So that way you can very easily export from production and import into a test tenant, where you just have to change the name of the change the information in the data file, the other URLs, etc., and then you can simply target it to your test tenant, and it will also apply successfully. Okay. Second question. I know that you are familiar with the DSC workshop template, and a number of customers are now trying to implement M365 DSC, but are struggling with the data handling. So we're trying to merge both concepts, the DSC workshop and M365 DSC. Do you have specifically any experience in kind of putting these two concepts together, or are we touching new ground here? Like I mentioned, I've looked at Datum and the DSC workshop in combination with SharePoint DSC, and I'm working on Microsoft 365 DSC. And personally, I have not combined those two together. It's something we can work on, which is a good idea to create the composite resources for Microsoft 365 DSC as well. Yeah, and if I hear how you are generating the resources, I think we should also think about the generator who is creating the composite resources, because otherwise it will be also a mismatch and a total struggle. Yeah, exactly. Makes total sense. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Yorick. Let's connect afterwards.
Hi, it's Alan here. Just a quick question. Something I saw earlier today, last night. I can't remember exactly when. Is it possible now, from what I saw, that you can use service principals in certificate-based auth with 365? Exactly. Okay. Yeah.
We just got a nice present from the product group, where I think planner and security and compliance still required credentials. There was no service principal authentication supported, and in the last couple of days they released a New Year's present where their modules are updated and now support the service principals for those workloads as well. And I think Nick shared the link to the authentication, the current authentication matrix. Let me share that with you. As you can see, all workloads currently support credentials, but also certificate thumbprint. Not all certificate path and application secret and managed identity, but certificate thumbprint is now supported by all workloads that we support within Microsoft 365 DSC as well.
Okay, many thanks. Brilliant. It's good news.
Yeah, exactly. It was something that we were very happy about as well, and have been pushing with the various product groups, especially the credentials. One of the best practices is, if you have a credential, use MFA, especially when it has high privileges. And if you want to configure stuff, you need global admin privileges, and global admins, you need MFA. The best practice is configure MFA. But as you can imagine, the LCM is running in the background, is an unattended process, and MFA and unattended processes, that's not a good match. So that's why the support of service principals is a welcome addition, where we can now use everything using service principles, not relying on any accounts without MFA.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? If there are, please come to the Q&A area in the front.
And when you finish, please move off the Q&A area. Thank you, Raymond.
In other words, get lost.
Now, the reason is otherwise it streams the video as a spotlight to everyone, and that may affect the performances.
Yeah.
If there's no more question, you can probably catch Yorick around for a few minutes after this call.
Yep.
I don't know if Julia is still around. I think she was at the back of the room. Julia, no. She's hiding somewhere. Let me just go check if I can grab her. So Julia is Jodie's colleague, so she's new to the team. And let me just go grab. I'm checking on Teams if she's there. And yeah, so she had a survey which I don't have the link anymore. Oh, I've got this link here on AADSC, so Azure Automation DSC feedback. Here it is. All right, so I've put that in the chat. So basically, the machine config team is asking the questions. What are you missing out? Okay, she's in another call, so I'll do it. So basically, the team wants to know, okay, what are you missing from machine config that you had in Azure Automation DSC? And that's a good, feel free to tell them as much as you want, because this is, I think they're starting planning what is the next feature they will have to work on. And I have some ideas, but I don't want to push my agenda, so I'll let you fill this form, and then they will find out. And if you have questions, always try to catch Jodie or Julia. Jodie's on Twitter, so she's easy to reach out to. And otherwise, feel free to let me know, and then I can also forward to Jodie. But you probably have her email address and everything. If there's no more questions, I think we don't have anything else planned. Anything else worth the attention? If anyone wants to say anything, feel free to come in the Q&A area or to the stage, and feel free to say it. I just wanted to say hi, Josh. Hi, Mikey. Hi, Nick. Good to see you there as well. And just a very quick comment on reverse DSC, 2 minutes. Basically, I think what would be interesting to do is at the moment the export is generating the config. If we had an object model in between that we can change the output, that would be the best approach. So then we can have either just the data or just the script output. That would be great. That's what I'm going to say today. I'm off. Thank you. You're on mute if you went for the Q&A on the Q&A area to speak. You're on mute, Dimitrios.
Is that better?
Yep.
Fantastic. So I'm the PM for Winget at Microsoft, and I was just going to share, we've started working on DSC resources for installing, repairing, and getting Winget installed, as well as some other work that we're looking at kind of related to DSC. So I just wanted to kind of share that. I'm going to paste the issue link in the chat. We're more than happy to have feedback. It's all open source, so you can kind of go dig in. We've got some PRs that are in progress, and I think this is going to be part of our pathway of getting onto Windows Server. And we've also been discussing some other DSC related things as well. So just kind of introduction, and if anybody's interested, feel free to go take a peek, and you can reach out on GitHub or Twitter, or email me directly, however you want to communicate.
That's awesome. I guess that means next so we have the DSC community calls every 6 weeks. So you're saying you're doing a presentation on the DSC resources for Winget next time?
Yeah, if we're far enough ahead on it, we will. We've got our first PowerShell module, kind of, I would say, super alpha. We're working with Jeff Hicks and some others from the community on fixing things. Our team is primarily sort of embedded C++ type developers. So a lot of the team is really learning about PowerShell, and we would love the feedback to make sure that we're building it in a way that makes sense and that the modules and the commandlets work kind of the way you're thinking. We're going to break them down under 4 namespaces. We're going to have one for DSC, one for the client, one for working with manifests and sources, and then another one that we're looking at. We're not sure if we're going to do this one or not, but it's really kind of unifying everything together and making it easier to kind of maintain your own private sources and manifests.
Perfect. We'll have a look at that for sure, and then we'll invite you to the next DSC community call, and then I'll touch base with you probably.
Great. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? I can see Nick is taking the go-kart and then he's leaving. All right, see you everyone. You can visit the map if you haven't had time yet. So you can go outside of this room back into the pub, and then you can also go out from the pub into the PS world, and you will see the map is quite big. You can, even if it's closed, you can still access the big venue where we had Minicon. We haven't changed it yet. And this is probably where we will have Minicon as well in September. I just wanted to remind everyone that we also organized the PowerShell Conference Europe. So if you go to https://psconf.eu, you can find the information there. If you're in the London area or not too far, you can look at PS Day UK. Like if you go in the pub, you will have the 2 logos, and then just by the logos, you press X, and then you will see the website showing up. So the one for PS Day UK is on the PS Day UK logo, and the other one is for the PSConf EU logo. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Thanks very much for coming, and the space is open for another 20 hours or so, so feel free to hang out. Thank you. Bye-bye.